Welcome to RBC Presents The Walrus Talks, The Future of the Arts Conversation. My name is Shelley Ambrose. I'm the Executive Director and the Publisher of The Walrus. We are thrilled to be here with you in Kerner Hall on the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Toronto has long been a meeting place of Indigenous people, and we're honored to continue a long tradition of conversation in this place. So this little optimistic project called The Walrus started 15 years ago, and we recognize that Canada's conversation is complex and necessary, and so that conversation takes many forms at The Walrus. Fact-based journalism in The Walrus magazine and at thewalrus.ca, The Walrus books, The Walrus podcasts, and in rooms like this at The Walrus Talks. No matter where The Walrus is or how it is consumed, we embrace our commitment to be independent and bring together interesting and interested people who care about the issues that matter. So some of you know we like to play a little game with you. Hands up if you read The Walrus. That is awesome. Hands up if you support The Walrus financially by subscribing or donating. You are my people. Later, I want more hands, but we'll talk about that at the end. So on behalf of our board of directors, some of our board members are here, and our board chair, Helen Burston, our founding donor, the Chalkers Foundation, Jim O'Reilly and Bruce Bennett are here. On behalf of all of us and all Walry, thank you for that support. Tonight is our 103rd Walrus Talks. I know, I'm aging in dog years up here. So hands up if you've attended a Walrus Talks before. I've done 103. And hands up if you're new. Let's welcome the new people. Hello, new Walry. There is absolutely no way we can do all of this work that we do. We are literally 28 people in a basement. There is no way we can do the work we do without our partners. And one of our strongest, longest partnerships is with the folks at RBC and RBC Foundation. RBC's support of the arts has been a long-standing priority, and they truly recognize the role arts have in building vibrant communities, particularly through emerging artists and new, diverse talent. To tell us a bit more, please welcome Vice President Corporate Citizenship for RBC and the Executive Director of RBC Foundation, our friend Valerie Chort.
Thank you, Shelley, and also congrats on that video. Wasn't that awesome? So moving. It's wonderful to be here and see the turnout this evening in spite of the weather. We are thrilled that you could each join us for this edition of Walrus Talks for the Future of the Arts. It is an event that gives us the opportunity for all of us that are involved in the arts sector to come together, to connect, to show our support and recognition for the importance of the arts. In essence, by being here, we are advancing an important discourse, why the arts matter. We think about that a lot, actually. And last year, RBC supported the Culture Track Canada study. It was a national survey of cultural consumers, attitudes, motivators, and barriers to participation. 2018 was the first year for the Canadian study, which was based on interviews with over 6,400 culture goers in Canada from coast to coast. It's the first Canadian study of its kind in over 2 decades, and it gave us some important insights. The study highlighted why the arts matter and why they continue to have meaningful impact on shaping the cultural fabric of our country. So a few key highlights. Audiences view culture as inclusive, as a broad and diverse set of activities, from visual arts to a local street fair. Arts goers have also redefined what constitutes cultural activity, from moving from the traditional, such as museums, ballets, and operas, to activities such as parks, community festivals, food and drink experiences, or a combination of all of these. There are also generational implications. Millennials are the most culturally active, 35% more likely to participate compared to older generations. And the most popular activities with audiences seem to share 3 common principles: community, culture brings people together; connection, Culture creates empathy, encouraging understanding and compassion, and discovery gives a new perspective. So what does this mean for us? That Canadian audiences are adamant. Culture, broadly defined, matters in their lives, whether by providing a sense of belonging through community, fostering empathy through connection with others, or bringing much-needed perspective via a sense of discovery. Culture has intrinsic, lasting value and is a force for good in changing our society. We agree, which is why we support and invest in the arts, and that's been a long-standing commitment. As Shelley mentioned, our Emerging Artist Project is a multi-year funding commitment dedicated to supporting artists in their earliest stages of their careers and helping to bridge the gap from emerging to established by supporting transformative programs, such as the one that we support with in terms of the Walrus. We support these talented artists through mentoring programs, education, providing access and exposure to new audiences. Based on our research, these are key determinants of success. So a few numbers, since we're a financial institution. Since 2003, our investments in the arts have exceeded $72 million, but really the important numbers are, since 2015, over 8,000 artists have been supported through these programs, and these programs are really gaining scale and momentum. In 2017 alone, we invested over $7.3 million to 130 organizations, helping to bridge the gap for over 3,000 emerging artists. So the arts landscape is ever-changing, and it's vital that we work to understand the causes and implications of that change in order to effectively support the next generation of artists. This evening, I'm excited to hear about the future of arts in Canada, to learn more about where this sector is headed from the perspective that matters the most, that of the artists themselves. Thank you for joining, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you for funding the arts as one of the 130 organizations. We're very grateful to you. So tonight's topic, as Valerie mentioned, is a necessary one. It's broad. What does the future of the arts look like in Canada? What does art sound like? How can art animate communities and cities? Whose voices will be heard? Who decides? Who will the audience be? How will art be created, funded, consumed? Tonight you will hear 7 of many possible perspectives from the point of view of a writer, performer, musician, artist, curator, and director. And at the end of this exercise, we will have a lot to talk about at the post-talks reception, to which you are all invited. So here is how the Walrus Talks works. Each of the 7 talkers has 7 minutes. They know this. You will see and hear 7 talkers for 7 minutes each in a row. We keep the lights up. Please keep your program in your hand. The program is in speaker order. I do not jump up like a jack-in-the-box and introduce them to you. They will introduce themselves. You can follow along. If you'd like to know more about them, flip it over, and their full or partial bios are on the back. So you will see and hear 7 of them in a row. And just before I let them get underway, I'd like to thank each in advance. So thank you to the Art Gallery of Ontario's Curator of Indigenous Art, Wanda Nanibush. Thank you to Executive Director of Arts Etobicoke, Menon Dwarka. Thank you to film programmer and arts writer, Sarah-Tai Black. Thank you to Artistic Director of Bad News New Days, Paolozza. Thank you to poet and novelist Noor Naga. Thank you to Polaris Prize-winning musician and artist Lido Pimienta. Thank you to contemporary visual artist Shary Boyle. And thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
But I'm not counting the 7 minutes because I'm Indigenous and I have to start in a different way. So I will start the clock in a minute. Ha! Hello, everybody. Anine. I just want to say this is the land of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, not most recently, for a very long, hundreds of years time. And And this land is governed by the One Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which is between the Haudenosaunee and the Mississauga Anishinaabe and the larger Anishinaabe Confederacy, because we warred over this land. And that's just a fact. And I would say that this land is also the home of fishing weirs that were the Anishinaabe and the Wendat. They shared them together, and this was a trading center for many nations. And I just want to say, well, also I'm really happy for the 90,000 Indigenous people that live here today. Now I'll start the clock. Hi, I'm Wanda Nanibush, Nanibush from Bosley First Nation, Wolf Clan. And I come from I'm the youngest of 17. And I was thinking about the future of the arts, and some of my brothers and sisters, because I'm the youngest, they say that they didn't have the same opportunities to enter the arts like I did. And it makes them, there's like a wish fulfillment there that they would love to have. So I think when I was thinking about the future of the arts, that's what I would like to see, is that every child, every person who wants to join the arts wouldn't have poverty hold them back. So I'm going to start with a quote from a white colonialist from France. Just because I like to shake shit up. To create today is to create dangerously. Any publication, and I'm gonna put my own words into his, or creation is an act, and that act exposes one to the passions of an age that forgives nothing. Hence, the question is not to find out if this is or is not prejudicial to art. The question for all those who cannot live without art and what it signifies is merely to find how, among the police forces of so many ideologies, he mentions the church, but we have more today, the strange liberty of creation is possible. And in my mind, I have the image from Archer Pachowis, who's a Cree artist here in town. He did a piece called "The Future is Beautiful." And I would say also that part of the future is beautiful is that the arts needs to be part of every conversation, not a hived off one. It needs to be part of every conversation, from the economy to politics to how we raise our children to education. So the image you see here is the other one that was stuck in my mind, which is Marianne Nicholson, House of Ghosts. And our present time is haunted. We are haunted by many, many histories that we have ignored, many, many violences we've enacted, and many, many beautiful, beautiful knowledges that these ghosts are trying to whisper in our ears and trying to bring forth. And the arts is one place that we do that in. So this is a work that was at the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2008. And as you can see, it transforms the front of the gallery into a Northwest Coast Kwakwaka'wakw ceremonial house. It's 30 feet wide, and it's a site-specific projection that changes from day to night. And the thing with the ceremonial house, it is that door between the spirit world and the human world. And more we understand the way arts bridges that gap. But what she was trying to draw attention to is that this is also the site of a courthouse. So it was the provincial courthouse that would have jailed her people for practicing their arts and culture. And so it's really important to remember that as we walk in this world, we're not standing in the same place together. She stands in the Vancouver Art Gallery as a contemporary artist, loving this space as an artist, but also feeling the pain of her people who were charged for practicing these things in the past. And so we have to understand that about each other. We don't carry the same places, we don't carry the same times, we don't carry the same histories. I'm going to quote her. The House of Ghosts acts much like traditional performances executed within the Kwakwaka'wakw ceremonies, where through an exhibition of the spectacular, it is believed that spirits can be enticed into communion with humans, allowing them to conduct extraordinary feats. I believe in the creative future. It doesn't shut down creativity. We can't shut down creativity today. We don't know who we will become, but we set out these pathways. That's our responsibility. That's one of the points about prophecy. And I'm interested in the fifth world. The fifth world marks out the new consciousness where we relearn our responsibilities to the earth. I'm going to quote Almanac of the Dead writer Leslie Marmon Silko. The world's capitalist vision is the one world economy. That is their fifth world. But the fifth world is a new consciousness in the hearts of all human beings. The idea that the earth is shared and finite, that we are naturally connected to the earth and with one another. Every assertion of Indigenous visual sovereignty is a dreaming. As Scott Momaday says, we are what we imagine. Our very existence consists in our imagination of ourselves. Our destiny is to imagine completely who, what, that we are. The greatest tragedy that can befall us is to go unimagined. The future of arts is this great imagining. This dreaming gives us pathways to a creative future, and more we see artists making work about the pressing issues of our time, like water and climate change, while also maintaining play, experimentation, honesty, intuition that keeps the future open to that ever-transforming and chancy aspects of life that we don't want to lose. So, as artists and institutions, we've embarked on a profound critique of colonial thought, which lies in subjugating the body to the mind, women to men, all human beings to whiteness, animals to humans, collectives to corporations, truth to the lie, creativity to bureaucracy, peace to war, water to tailing pond, earth to economy. This new consciousness is rising, and its heart is the arts. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am Menon Dwarka, the Executive Director of Arts Etobicoke. If we're going to talk about the future of the arts and culture in our city, let us begin by paraphrasing Her Holiness Margaret Atwood. If an immigrant does wipe away his ethnic origin, there's no new Canadian identity ready for him to step into. He is confronted only by a nebulosity, a blank. No ready-made ideology is provided for him. Obviously, by quoting Survival, Atwood's 1972 Canlit critique, I'm talking about the past. But what if I was to say that Atwood touches on something that might point to a brighter future for all of us? Over the last 50 years, we've been involved with one of the world's great social experiments. Can millions of people of different backgrounds live together peacefully in the same city? We're doing just fine here in Toronto, so long as our minds and bodies are in different places. For those of us in the mainstream, our minds are in the United States. While we're not technically owned by the Americans, all of our pop culture, political culture, culinary, artistic, and sports culture seems to have deep roots there. I spent 20 years in the arts and culture sector in New York City and have great empathy for our plight. It's hard to know where you are when the largest manufacturer of culture the world has ever known looks like, sounds like, and speaks like you. Or so we've been led to believe. This is the blank, the void of which Ms. Atwood was speaking. And the newcomers, can they not step into the same Americanized space as us? They could, but their minds are elsewhere too, back with the families and friends they left behind for a better life. Our primary difference from newcomers is that we are dreaming of different places. But what if having your mind and body in different places was a virtue? What if their dreams of home and our dreams of America, or Britain for you older folks, all landed in the same physical space? What if that was something we all shared? What if that's what made us all Canadian? One of our previous prime ministers tried to divide the country into old stock Canadians and newcomers. But I actually like to think that most of us are new stock Canadians, people who are acclimated to the Americanized culture we inhabit in our day-to-day life, but who also are versed in the culture of our ancestors, whether they come from points across the globe or from our First Nations. We seamlessly move back and forth fiercely clinging to one part of our cultural makeup in one moment, rejecting it outright in the next, with any fear of inauthenticity or betrayal. We are as much here as we are there. New Stock Canadians understand that the roots of our culture come from elsewhere, and navigating that cultural landscape requires a new kind of cultural literacy. It's basically knowing everything from everywhere, from any time and place. If only there were tools to help us pull information in real time from a large global database to decipher the world around us. Of course, I'm being facetious, but imagine if we could use the internet and social media to virtually tag every artistic and cultural creation with metadata pointing to all the people and things that went into its making. Imagine holding up a mobile device and seeing all the influences that went into making a work of art. Perhaps through these devices, we could recognize pieces of ourselves in unexpected places in the physical world around us. My organization, Arts Etobicoke, is working on virtually tagging the 30-odd murals of Islington Village through an augmented reality project. It's a highly diverse area with regard to ethnicity and income, but the murals reflect a time before Canada's modern immigration policy. By tagging the stories of Canada's past with visual overlays of newcomer life in these murals, we can engender a new kind of conversation between the new and the old, as well as increase a sense of belonging for everyone who lives in the neighborhood. So that's all fine and dandy for publicly funded community art, but what about our large cultural institutions? We could tag the Canadian Opera Company's production of Eugene Onegin with the hashtag Black Writers, because Pushkin, the librettist, was black. We could tag all of the objects in the ROM with the names and cities of the people who live in Toronto who claim an ancestral connection to these artifacts. We could tag every performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with the hashtag Janissary bands, in memory of those Christian slaves who played the fife and drum music for the Turks, which Beethoven emulated in the seventh variation of his Ode to Joy. So perhaps the ready-made ideology we were looking for back in the 70s is the ideology of the blank space where all of our dreams can come together, a place where our unadorned humanity doesn't have to be shoehorned into a national identity. But all identities can coexist or be cast aside, all without the violence we see on the news on a daily basis. When Mr. Trudeau proclaimed in the New York Times that Canada was the first post-national country, I don't think he recognized how profound his words would be. I'd ask you to join me on this journey into the blank space, to start owning and looking for all of the diverse elements that make up our world, inside and outside of the arts. But from the looks of it, you're already here with me. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sarah-Tai Black. Thank you to the Walrus for having me tonight. I do need to warn you guys that I wrote this talk while listening to Tracy Chapman on repeat, and it shows. It shows. When Blair Elliott, the event manager for the Walrus, telephoned me last week to ask what my talk would be on today, I was very, very tired. I hadn't really slept. I was in pain. I was overwhelmed by the amount of work that I have to do this month. And worst of all, I was hangry. So when Blair called me, as lovely and supportive as she is, let's give it up for Blair, actually, and Shelley, and all of the people. There are a lot of people working here tonight who made it possible for us to be here, and we don't see them, so we should clap for them. Anyways, when Blair called and asked for an update on what I was going to talk about tonight, I vacantly answered, diversity? And I pretty much left it at that. I clearly hadn't yet had the time, or frankly, the energy to really shape any sort of firm idea of the ground that I wanted to cover. And God bless her, she worked with what little I gave her. In my mind, I thought my talk would be some sort of makeshift Coles notes of my entire Twitter feed, something kind of easy like that, a voice that I was used to turning on in public, the type of voice that I and many others like me are known for. I am not an activist, and although I know and work alongside many who are rightly called such, I deeply respect the work that they do. I consider myself an advocate that has had to constantly remind herself that perhaps not rising to the level and the capacity of activist proper might actually be okay. For the past several years, I have had the privilege, and indeed it is a privilege, of speaking quite publicly about film and art and representation and all of the complex politics which come along with it. It's the sort of job that my second and third generation family are proud of, but that they don't fully understand, in as much as it isn't labor in the traditional sense. And frankly, at times, it does not pay in the traditional sense. But it is still work to me, and as much as I enjoy it for the most part, it is still work that takes its toll. As last week went on, I continued to push tonight's talk to the back of my brain. I was simply too busy, too tired, and if I'm being real with you guys, too depressed to pre-plan my big diversity talk. I intuitively already knew my main talking points: community, accessibility, advocacy, dismantling every single fucking system that has continually failed both myself and not myself thus far. Easy stuff, whatever, you know. These are the things that I have always returned to in both my work and my personal life. They are always there, and they are always being relearned and reformed. Even more than that, though, there is always the knowledge of someone else, someone always unlike myself and the communities that I am a part of, someone in a seat of power of whatever sort who wants me to share with them those feelings and experiences that I have recently begun to give language to quite freely and seemingly without filter and with so much care as to seem without it. This is often exhausting, but ultimately it is fine. The importance of making different kinds of space means I'm fine with it. My privilege as a light-skinned, university-educated Black woman means I'm fine with it. Precarious labor means I'm fine with it. When I widen my scope, I know that I have it better than many. And even more so, I know why I've been chosen by these types of people. I've never been very good at math, but the math here isn't very difficult to do. The more I talk about these things, I feel lulled into a false sense that things are changing. Things are different, there's no doubt about that, but enough to enact any kind of systemic shift, I'm really doubtful. It's kind of darkly funny that I spend so much time talking about what we need to do to make things better for underheard people working in the arts, when most times I wake up not fully believing in the ability of it to really happen at all. This is not for any lack of trying on our end. I don't believe that the people with the power to change things, or that enough people of this sort will give up their seat at the table. I just don't. Historically speaking, this has never been the case. We have always had to fight to take back what is ours, or at least try to. These are people who have succeeded because no one else can afford to. These are people who have come to make a so-called common space, which taxes people like us every time we enter it. There is the work that we do, and then there is the work that is placed upon us. That work doesn't care that we are tired, that our bodies hurt, that we have other people and children to take care of, that we can't afford health care or groceries or rent, never mind film festivals or industry talks. That work doesn't care that there are spaces that we literally cannot enter because people have not thought that we would be there in the first place. This work doesn't care about our plans for the future. This work doesn't care that we are waiting for something better. The onus has always been on us, and I'm pretty sure it will continue to be. And when I say us, and when I say our, and when I say we, I of course do not mean all of us. Looking at this room, I know that I do not mean all of us. If you are confused as to whether or not you are part of the us, chances are that you are not, and this is not for you. Or in some way, maybe it is. Maybe you should know about the kind of work that has been placed on our shoulders, or rather, maybe you should fully open your eyes to it. Ask yourself why your canon is different than ours. Ask yourself what experience it is that you bring to the table when you critique us, when you edit us, when you hire us to speak about things that you have no language to speak of yourself. Ask yourself why you see so much of yourself everywhere at all times, as if you are some sort of default setting in human form. Make yourself receptive to different forms of knowledge. Make yourself uncomfortable. Decenter yourselves. And yet again, I have sunk into this work, because we can never just be. I imagine that being without this work might be what it feels like to be free, or perhaps just what it feels like to be numb. For us, the real us that I'm talking about here tonight, I feel this. The more work that we do, and it is very important work that we do, and the more work that is placed upon us, I am less and less optimistic about the potential for change that so many of us, myself included, have spoken of. And I feel guilty about this, knowing how hard we work and at what cost. I wonder slyly if this is the new Afro-pessimism. Twitter tells me it isn't. I wonder if, like so much of the vocabulary that industries have appropriated from social justice movements, we should be thinking more in terms of harm reduction rather than eagerly anticipating some sort of logical tectonic shift, as if their systems of logic have ever thought about us to begin with. I wonder if we should more forcefully change our advocacy from how do we work to make better systems from ourselves to how do we work to make this kind of work less harmful for those most vulnerable to its effects? How can we work to sustain ourselves in doing this labor? This is by no means a new idea, but rather one that must be remembered and firmly held onto, especially in those moments when we are most willing to forgo it. Because, well, I can't speak for everyone else, but I know that I myself, I am tired from today, and I know that I am tired from the days that came before today, and I am simply too tired to think about tomorrow any longer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanda, Menon, and Sarah-Tai, for those wonderful words. Good evening. My name is Adam Paolozza. I'm a theater creator, an actor, and director, but I originally trained as a mime. However, I love talking about theater, and so I'm very thankful to the Walrus for having me here tonight to talk about theater. Yeah, it's a real honor and a privilege to be here tonight. It really is a privilege. So when the Walrus approached me to talk about the future of the arts, it's a lofty subject heading there, hashtag, whatever you want to call it, I started to think about my relationship to my own future and how I kind of situate my work, my theatrical work in this context. And several observations struck me, but the first observation, and it was actually pointed out by my father, and he's sitting over there, when we were talking about politics. We don't always agree about that, but he said something to me that really struck me. He's like, oh, you're speaking from a place of fear. And I thought, he's right. Whenever you mention the future, whenever I think of the future, I am very afraid of the future, as I'm sure many of you can empathize with. And why is that? Well, because of economic precarity. I'm afraid I won't have the financial wherewithal to support myself in the future. Or if I have children, which is also something I'm afraid of, will I be able to support them? I'm afraid of the future of the planet. I'm afraid for the future of the oceans, for other species. I'm afraid that public discourse is becoming more and more polarized, that there's less tolerance, that there's less space for difference and for complexity. And I think this is something in art that we really need to work towards, art that can hold complexity, not offer easy answers. And I'm afraid that we're losing our capacity for empathy. And feeling fear all the time is very exhausting. So, over the last couple of years, I've been asking myself, how can I deviate some of this energy that I'm putting into this fear into something more useful? Something that could be useful to myself and to others, and how can the work that I make, going forward in time, emerge from this? So I started to think a little bit more about the nature of theater itself, about its special relationship to time. Theater doesn't engage with the future in the same way that other arts like painting or film do. It's ephemeral. It's an art of the present. It doesn't leave behind an artifact. And this uniqueness of each performance of a theater, it creates a sense of urgency, that feeling that if we look away, we might miss something. And I think that this requires both from the artists and the audience an enormous amount of attention to the present moment that we're in. Attending theater is an act of empathy. So on a practical level, I think this is great training for life, and especially for those like me who have a lot of anxiety and have difficulty being present to the present. And if that were all that theater did, I think that would be marvelous and wonderful, but I do believe that theater does more than that. Perhaps I'm naive and a little bit utopic in my belief, but I do believe that theater can do more than that for us. And what can it do? Well, the kind of theater that I love and the kind of theater that I'm imagining in the future is a poetic theater. And I don't mean poetic in the sense of literature, but I mean it more in the sense of the Greek verb poesis, which means to call into presence. Theater has the power to call into presence new visions of existence. It can offer striking new examples of how we can relate to each other, transforming the way that we derive meaning from experience. It challenges old modes of perception and encourages the development of new ones. And the kind of theatrical visions that really inspire me, they do more than just reflect back a realistic image of the world. Because I think especially, in Canada, I can't speak for everywhere in the world, but we definitely have a bias towards psychological naturalism. I think that comes from film, but I won't get on a soapbox about that. So what I'm more interested in are visions that offer a critically informed aesthetic response to the world, that create a run in the fabric of our daily lives, an aesthetic tear in reality, where meaning and judgment are held in suspense. And I believe in this caesura that there is new space that can open up for critical thinking, when we're confronted by the limits of our own understanding. And I think this is why, in other times in history, theater has been persecuted by the state or by the church. And I think that's why, in times like, in political turmoil times, like in the Czech Republic when the revolution was happening, there were still underground mime performances happening. And I think that, I think theater has this power. And have you ever had this kind of experience with a piece of art that sort of changed the way you understood things? I'll tell you one. I can remember the first one that I ever had. I was about 10 years old, and I went to the Whitby Public Library with my mother, who's also in the audience, who also taught me how to read. Let's hear it from mothers. And I discovered surrealism. So I saw a book of paintings that looked very unusual, and I kind of picked it up, and it blew my mind completely. I didn't know that you could look at the world that way, that you could place these seemingly ordinary, unrelated objects and figures together to create a sense of the marvelous. And it opened up a whole new way for me to understand how an image could mean something, not just what it could mean. Because at the time I didn't have critical language or intellectual experience to make sense of what I saw, but nevertheless, the affective force of these paintings, they left me changed. I didn't see the world differently after that. And so I believe that this search for these new visions of existence that have the power to change us is the real task of artists in the present, moving forward into the future. And I think that we need to approach the research and creation of these new theatrical visions in a spirit of adventurous, collaborative, formal innovation, without fear of the unknown, without fear of failure. And I think that some of the critical discourse in the city, the theater critics, they can help us by this. I think we're all on the same team. Let's get rid of this stupid star rating system. That show is terrible. That's why you should go see it, because it's going to help you learn something different. I don't know. Thank you. Anyways, no more soapbox. But without fear of hard work, because it's going off into the unknown, right? Without fear of new artistic forms that challenge conventional means of theatrical representation. Because I think that we need new strategies for representation, new strategies for the body, new strategies for the voice, for text, for the image, for sexuality. And we need to create a dramaturgy that encourages us to critically reevaluate culturally accepted standards of value that have become so pervasive so as to be invisible. And I am the first to admit that I am still learning how to see these invisible, oppressive standards. And so I think, new ways of seeing the world, it requires not only new stories, but new ways of telling stories. And if we want to encourage our audiences to think and see and think about the world differently, we need to ask them to be critical not only of what they see, but how they see it. And I think that this is really the place where art and ethics, where aesthetics and ethics intersect. I think this is why the Italian Marxist thinker, that's right, he's a leftist Marxist thinker. He's part of the conspiracy that's rampant in universities. Paolo Virno, I think this is why he situates the avant-garde movements of the past, as problematic as they can be, close to progressive social movements, as they both point out, quote, the inadequacy, the disproportion of the old standards. Virno goes on to say, quote, it's about new rules. The collapse of old rules and anticipating new rules, even if only formal, is where aesthetics and social resistance meet. This is a common ground where a new society is anticipated, end quote. And this is where I see a real tangible effect that theater can have on mitigating our fear of the future. It's almost as if theater teaches us to be better prepared by the future by attending more closely to the present moment, to the here and now that's happening now, and now, and now. And now I fear that my 7 minutes have come and gone, so thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Noor Naga, and 2 years ago I wrote a verse novel called The Mistress Washes Praise. It's about a young Muslim woman in Toronto who becomes romantically involved with a married man. When an excerpt of this won the Bronwyn Wallace Award, I read a couple poems at the ceremony, and unbeknownst to me, the reading was recorded. The recording was sent to my mother, who sent it to my father, who sent it to my grandmother in Egypt. And then the verse novel became a family affair. They'll think you're the mistress, my mother objected. My father waited until we were alone together to warn me that with writing comes a moral responsibility, and that in a few years' time my own ethics might evolve in contradiction to something I've already written, and at that point it'll be too late to retract it. He was right, of course. This is in fact an aspiration of mine. I hope my ethics will be always evolving, always slipping out from under my feet to meet my level of experience. But my father's comment begged the question, was the verse novel I'd written somehow an articulation of my ethics? There is a belief in Islam that if you build a school or plant a tree or dig a well, if you discover a new cure for disease or produce a work of useful scholarship, then you've left behind a good that keeps on multiplying in the world long after you've left it. The Quran describes it as a grain of corn which grows 7 ears, and each ear has 100 grains. The flip side of this formula is also true. A wrong committed or a misguidance transmitted can continue to injure both you and others ad infinitum. This is what my father is worried about. Islamically, even just airing out your own sins or shortcomings is considered injurious because of the possibility that it will inspire others. How then can illicit love serve as my plot? You begin to see my problem. To complicate things further, I didn't just write about a Muslim mistress. I wrote about her in English, in Canada. My grandmother and I are exactly 50 years apart. We were living together in Egypt when I came home one day to find her sitting on the leather couch with something to say in her mouth. She had just heard the recording. If your character is going to be a Muslim, why make her a mistress? I started to explain the whole verse novel is about an affair. Okay, she countered. If she must be a mistress, why make her a Muslim? Muslims can be mistresses too. Yes, okay, she conceded. That might be true, but they are already saying about us what you are now saying about us. That we're wicked and animal and dangerous. They already hate us, and they love to see you agree with them. My grandmother didn't say, "You're hurting us." She didn't have to. It's impossible to be a Muslim exposed to Western literature, media, and pop culture without feeling that we're living in a time of representational warfare. From the young, unshaven suicide bombers to the obese, tyrannical oil sheikhs, to the abused, submissive, hijab-wearing wives, the stereotypes come in many flavors, all of which are negative, and many of which are deadly to people in the Middle East. The invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, which collectively resulted in over 200,000 civilian deaths, was predicated on years of pathologizing those same civilians as threatening and subhuman. This is not just an American problem. Since 2001, over 40,000 Canadian Forces personnel have been deployed to Afghanistan. Canada is the second largest arms exporter to the Middle East, second only to the US. But foreign policy is always a story here before it's boots on the ground over there. All mechanisms of violence depend on the dramatization of difference between self and other. Given the dominant narrative around Muslims right now and the bloodshed that it engenders, there's an understandable anxiety in my community about how to rescue our image on the international stage. There's been a movement of writers, poets in particular, scrabbling to produce positive representations of us that demonstrate our peacefulness, intelligence, modernity, our relatability, even our moral superiority. Horse sense dictates that in order to prove to someone who thinks you're an animal that you're a human, you have to show them that you're a saint or a martyr. You have to overshoot the mark in order to land on it. Hence, the plethora of activist literature allegedly combating the demonization of Muslims by making an opera of our victimhood. If a book written by one of us is not loudly objecting or defending or educating in this way, it's often considered not just irrelevant, but actually incorrect, as though literature were a kind of political mathematics. This is most apparent in English. Among ourselves, in our own languages, we can afford to explore other questions, but as minorities and populations that have the power to hurt us, both here and overseas, there's an expectation that literary work will double as activism. My problem with this species of protest, however, is that it invalidates itself. When all the art a marginalized group produces is reactionary, defensive, didactic, outraged, it empowers the voice of the center by talking to it. I'm reminded of a tweet by the Muslim Australian poet Omar Sarr, in which he says, "If we stay stuck in a news cycle of Muslim monster versus Muslim human, we lose. To debate your humanity is to implicitly agree it's uncertain." When literature considers itself a corrective prescription for xenophobes, it privileges xenophobic readers. It respects their accusations enough to challenge them. And the more energy exhausted in communicating with an aggressor, the more their power and centrality is affirmed. Hence, to write in response to hatred is to fail before you've begun. My grandmother's objection turned out to be a composite of my parents'. Like my mother, she's concerned that the verse novel will be read autobiographically, as a collective confession on behalf of an entire religion. Like my father, her concern is ethical rather than aesthetic. She's less interested in what the work is than in what it will do in the world. She worries that a Canadian audience will read about a Muslim mistress and take Islam itself to be licentious. She thinks this country isn't ready to allow a Muslim character that much individuality. After a year of ruminating on this question, I turn it to you. Are we ready? For Muslim writers in Canada, we can't escape the possibility that our work will be read in the service of bigotry. But we can, I think, choose to ignore the bigots. Let them talk to themselves. We elect the imaginary readers that we write for, and so we are responsible for the host of expectations and restrictions that they bring to our pages. Personally, I believe there is space in CanLit between the Muslim terrorist and the Muslim martyr for a Muslim mistress. In fact, I think she's necessary if we're going to escape the defense position we've been occupying for years. I realize that writing such a character means I may be understood by my own community as having betrayed them, as having showed outsiders our lingerie, showed them our desire for touch, our disappointment in God sometimes, our difficulty praying sometimes. There's a pressure on Muslim writers in Canada to have all your characters on their best behavior, perfect table manners. But I want to write as though I have nothing to prove, as though I were writing to a country that loves me already, and my mother's hijab and my father's beard. Toronto, I want to be on my worst behavior and have you know what I mean.
Hello. My name is Lido Pimienta from Colombia, South America, based here in Toronto. So, on the question of what do I think the future of the arts is? Well, for one, we sure as hell do not need another movie about Van Gogh's life. When will we see a movie about the when and the how and the who stole the style from us? You know that guy Picasso and Modigliani? I want to know, and I want to see a movie about that. How and when did they steal that? The future of the arts industry is digital, and I am all for it. You know, make your work, document it, and showcase it on that platform. Do not waste any time or money in university. You don't need it to become an artist. Follow a good Instagram, and there is your lesson on aesthetics and beauty with a capital B. Unless, of course, if it's free, go to school. An online presence will most likely guarantee your gallery representation or a booking agency more than an art or music degree. Talent is not really a thing to worry about in the future. It is obscene how a 19-year-old and even younger non-trust fund young adult is allowed to acquire over $100,000 in debt, but be denied a loan from the bank to purchase a home when they're done with their academic career. It is heartbreaking, too, when that young adult is somebody like me who started her family at 21 years old, while in university and while making consensus to be able to be an art student, because that's how committed I was and still am to art. As a mother of 21, at 21 years old with a mother of one in university, without family in Canada or generational wealth to fall back to, it was very hard. But again, I am committed to be an artist. All I can think of when I think about my years in university is that when I was starting my family, entering that world of useless indoctrination, disguised as arts education, that I would have stopped myself and just watched some YouTube tutorials on art history, just like I did with my music career. So the future of the arts, like I said before, is digital, but it is also uncertain until the normalization of motherhood in the arts takes place. The representation of women in the arts depends on this. We are made to feel shame and as if though caring for others is stupid, that having children is for losers if you're white, and a way to get a check if you're brown or black, and the only thing that you're good for if you're Indigenous or Native. And in a political climate in which mothers and their babies and toddlers are being tear-gassed, running away from violence, what does art have even to do with anything at all? Who even cares? Art now, as I see it, fuels the white supremacist machine, and in Toronto, it fuels gentrification. I have this vision of Shelley Nero's screenshot from, the shirt. My ancestors were massacred and all I got was this shirt. Next to the Future is Female t-shirt. I don't know, I just look at them and I'm like, there is something there. Maybe I'll make art out of it. And I think about how the future has been female, the future and the present and the ongoing and the past, and we have been doing the work. So when I look at this t-shirt, it gives me like a bad taste in my mouth from it. Because as I said before, my future is now as a woman, doing everything, doing the most, doing all the labor, the emotional, physical, and still getting blamed for all the bad stuff that happens in the world. Being attacked by it when I raise my voice, because how dare I? But maybe it's because of that children's story, maybe you read it, Eve and the apple and the snake. I'll never read it to my baby. But anyways, Amazonian women have been doing this futurist female, I got this about my t-shirt, blah, blah, blah thing going on. They don't have a t-shirt though, and we don't see their artwork, because their artwork as indigenous Amazonian women who are fighting for the rainforest, it's not really art. That's not fine art. That's craft. So I would like to propose a new t-shirt in honor of the future of art, if I may. The future isn't female, the future is indigenous. Indigenous cultures of the Americas are matriarchal and children well taken care of, ensuring a good future for everyone. And art made by indigenous people now is the art that, frankly, is exciting. That is the future of art, whether it self-destructs or not. Sorry, I don't like Banksy. The beaters and weavers and makers of the world are the ones making fantastic art. Black girls using digital platforms to uplift themselves are the future. Kids with iPads composing electronic music are the future. The future of art will be once we normalize mothers and family, but not in a cheeky community art type trope way, you know what I'm saying? Actually, we need to make adequate space for us. We need to make space for us. The consensus that I have to make as a mother in order to be able to be an artist should not rest on my hands and my hands alone. Art institution, venues, and all places that cater and nurture art that benefit from me must create spaces for me and my children as well, so that I, as a woman, have the space to prosper, a safe platform to create, to be relevant, to stay relevant, and ensure a livelihood. Our periods and my breastfeeding 24/7 should be enough for all of you to pay me more. The future of arts looks great when I look at it from my perspective of a woman who is a prolific, really talented artist, excellent performer, and a crafter who happens to be a mother. In my world, I am able to meet my deadlines, go to my shows, do my art residencies, and go on tour with or without my kids, knowing that I will be compensated properly for my time and knowing that the venues and entities will hire the extra help to make sure that I can work as a woman. That is how I see the future of art happening. We might not have clean water in 5 years' time. And Indigenous people in the north of Canada know a bit about this, so they can tell us about it. So I'm excited to, in the future, and because the future is now, to see those shows and hear that music. Thank you.
Wow, I'm so moved to almost trembling by all the words of the people that have come up tonight. And it takes so much courage as an artist and so much intelligence and so much endless bravery and getting up in the morning and trying again to come to a platform like this with all these people in this audience looking at us and giving our very best every single time. I'm honored to be on the stage with that kind of intelligence and wisdom. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the Walrus for inviting us and hosting these conversations. I'm the last speaker of the night. We only have a few more minutes, and then we can have our glass of wine and think. My name is Shary Boyle. I'm a contemporary visual artist, and I see our topic through the lens of a narrative image maker, imagining the future as a kind of fiction. And so, as the last speaker of the night, I'm going to read you a bedtime story. The conservator waded gracefully through the European galleries, parting water past the archives. His good pants ballooned above his knees, cuffed in castaway tatters. Scavengers splashed along with their heads poking through Gainsborough portraits, lace collars framing their faces. The effect was hilarious, even he had to admit it. Drought, fire, hurricanes, the poisoned air, face masks and food wars. The seawater rose tight along the coast, then brimmed over the meniscus. For a moment, one felt sweet relief from the awful heat. Most of us expired. The survivors who started with less had less to lose and seemed to adapt better to the changes. The ultra-rich were gone to the moon, leaving the blue-chip artists behind. The artists were unsure of their legacies. Who would evaluate them if not the future? Investment speculation and the opening night gala eloped to some sexless bunker trying to figure out how to open a can of beans. The auction hammer went silent. Studio assistants floated by clinging to chunks of driftwood. No one rescued the secondary market. The conservator found the door to the restoration studio and pushed with fragile might. His memory was racked from starvation and rickety with age, but he was sure about this Francis Bacon left on the easel half a century ago. The bacon had smoke damage. He had been in the process of cleaning it with a soft slice of Wonder bread and his own spit when the sirens went off. Out of the frying pan into the fire. In the years of chaos that followed, the bacon had fouled. But in the nuclear sunset of his life, the conservator remembered its sheer sadistic vitality, and he hungered for it. Outside, the sun's staring problem was especially aggressive to white skin. Brown and golden skin fared better. The less connection to the land and water people had had, the harder it was for them to adapt. The survivors turned to those who had maintained continuous ties to the earth. Dog-strangling vine choked Ottawa. Indigenous and Northern affairs had been struck by a gigantic ball of lightning, the billions of files exploding into toxic stars that fell into ash. With the government dissolved and population decimated, national identity finally gave up the ghost. The old white mothers and fathers had perished, leaving behind a new generation who saw the founding project of Canada as a genocidal, gaslighting, racist, capitalist, colonial resource extraction shitshow. The work of these surviving youth was to dismantle the relics of their own white supremacy and collect dues for the manifesto of reparations. We all knew nothing could heal without attending to the original wounds. The betrayed earth demanded to be returned to Indigenous stewardship. It took the crisis of mass extinction to make it so. A beam of unnatural daylight bisected the museum's restoration room, drawing the conservator towards the bacon. His face was magnetized to the canvas. By long habit, his eyes calculated the fading pigments. The glory of red was lost. Blue had crashed. The yellows swaddled in a shroud of mold. But he hadn't come for the color. His eyes swung up to the broken window as a canoe from the Oceania department floated by, packed to the gunnels with neoclassical statuary. He heard the familiar songs of the body collectors as they rafted the dead to burial. He sank his hand deep into his pocket to draw out his knife. Cutting the canvas away from the wooden stretcher in a clean rectangle, the conservator softly tore the bacon into thin strips along the grain. Selecting one precious tendril like a Charlie Chaplin bootlace, he lifted it towards his mouth and let his saliva begin the slow, delicious dissolution of unbinding the rabbit skin glue. Nearby, deep in a vine-cloaked ravine, some rubble under the overpass had given way to reveal a fissure in the earth. Cool air trickled out with a faint, erotic smell of wet cement. A girl had been living in the ravine, hunting raccoons. There was a group of creatives, actually, of all ages, a collective. Most of them were sexed female or ambiguous. The plastics had won that battle. Males hadn't been born for decades. The salamanders and alligators could barely resist, and I told you so. But this was okay, as it meant the patriarchy was finally over. No more school shootings. No more dick pics. No more Fords. No more military cover-ups, corporate bonuses, popes, or barbecue. It was too late for museum acquisitions parody and international solo shows, but long dormant seeds were stirring. Their grandmothers had taught them how to survive through trauma, and some of those lessons involved slipping through cracks while no one was paying attention. The gender ambiguous and females were very good at this and knew how to find hidden entrances. Through the doorway in the ravine, our gently gendered collaborators descended single file towards a cool blackness. They squeezed through this damp and narrow passage, clinging to the sound of their breath like a dummy string. There was no turning back. Just as panic bore down, they felt the space radically expand and bumbled into it. The dripping of water echolocuted wide clay walls. It was a cave system. The clay sounded like porcelain. Was it an abandoned subway system? Somebody struck a match. The strike illuminated the station. Quickly, they lit a fire, and the movement of the flames animated their shadows along the long tiled wall. Helping each other, they dropped onto the tracks and explored for clues of sheltering and ritual. There were a few skulls, some spilled pop still sticky after 50 years. A bare footprint in the dirt that was not quite human. That mystery was solved moments later with the discovery of a red-haired orangutan corpse nestled under the platform's edge, an escapee of the Scarborough Zoo. Her parents had been born in Borneo. They started the song they sang for the dead. The acoustics down there were amazing. It was natural to act out the story of the orangutan. Someone picked up a torch and their shadows grew wild and strange. When the song was over, they drifted together towards the wall. One by one, they held their hands aloft and traced their fingers with looted lipstick across the tiles. They were here. Thank you.
Wow. Well, they're just starting to come out of their shells. That was incredible. I'm going to ask you all to come up here. Join me in thanking Wanda Nanibush, Menon Dwarka, Sarah-Tai Black, Adam Paolozza, Noor Naga, Lido Pimienta, and Shary Boyle, who wrote that story for tonight. Come on out here. We're going to do this thing. All right. 1, 2, 3. You too can have one of these. I'll tell you how. All right, we are going to set the talkers free with their walrus toques on, and you're going to meet them at the reception. I'm going to hold the audience just for a couple of moments. You guys, will see you out there. Thank you very much. You're going to join them for wine. As I said, we've now produced 103 Walrus Talks in every province and territory in the country. That means there are now more than 700 7-minute Walrus Talkers that you can watch whenever and wherever you want. Just head to our YouTube channel called Walrus Television, or go to thewalrus.ca, where you can also subscribe and donate. However, it is much more convenient to do so tonight. At our table in the lobby, you can subscribe for a full year. Now that the Canada Post strike is over, you'll actually get it in the mail. A full year subscription to the Walrus is just $25. And because fake news is cheap to make, and fact-based journalism about the issues that matter to you is expensive, and because we are marking more than 100 Walrus Talks, we're giving a special gift to anyone who donates $100 tonight at our merchandise table. The first 10 people who donate $100 or more will receive a Walrus toque, because Walry loves snow, and it's time for the snow, and 4 colors. So there's a table out there. If you donate $100, it's Giving Tuesday. That means you're supposed to give. On Tuesday, if every person in this room gave $100 tonight, we would raise $80,000 for independent fact-based journalism, and every penny that you donate tonight will end up in the hand of a writer, an artist, an illustrator, a photographer, an editor, or a designer. And providing a place for writers and artists to publish is crucial to the future of the arts. Funding, period, is crucial to the future of the arts. So be a funder. Give $100 or more tonight. Your donation is not only fully tax receivable, but we have a donor who will match you tonight, dollar for dollar. So your 100 will become 200. It's just like magic. I remind you, we are 28 people in a basement. We need you. Also at the reception, for no money, you can enter to win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Newfoundland from our friends at Adventure Canada. And you can also, well, you'll go out there and see. There's other stuff you can do. I would like to thank a whole bunch of people. I would like to thank everyone at RBC, Valerie Chort, your entire team, RBC Foundation, for your support of this, of the Walrus, and of the arts in general. I'd like to thank our national partners at Inspire and Shaw for being with us across the country. I want to thank everyone at this beautiful hall at Kerner Hall, and to the stellar Walrus staff, who you can also meet in the lobby, Blair, Kaylin, Tina. There are other Walry in the audience. Hands up, Walry. There they are. There's our editor, Jessica Johnson. If you have a story idea, I am not the right person. Jessica is the right person. So join us at the reception. Thank you to all who support the arts, business, individuals, taxpayers, governments, families, and thank you to the artists of all kinds and disciplines. No you, no us. No culture, no city, no nation, no country, no art, no soul. So join us where there's food and drink. If you are there, there will be great conversation. And finally, always remember, we are not the Walrus, you are the Walrus. Good night, safe home.